When we talk about fat loss, most people immediately jump to the concepts of calorie restriction or ramping up exercise intensity. And while both of those strategies have merit, they often miss a foundational truth. Your body's fat burning capabilities are deeply influenced by when you eat, not just what you eat. This brings us to a key biological lever, fasting aligned with circadian rhythms, a strategy that taps into how our brain and body are hardwired to function over a 24-hour cycle. Let's start by understanding what circadian rhythms are. Your body operates on an internal clock regulated by a brain structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, often referred to as your master clock. This clock is entrained primarily by light, particularly the rising and setting of the sun, and it governs the release of hormones, your body temperature, alertness levels, and yes, even your metabolism. Now, here's the fascinating part. Metabolic processes are not constant throughout the day. Your body is more insulin sensitive in the early part of the day, which means it's more efficient at using carbohydrates and less prone to store them as fat. As the day progresses, especially into the evening and night hours, that insulin sensitivity diminishes. In other words, the same meal consumed at 8 a.m. versus 8 p.m. will have a very different impact on your metabolism and fat storage. This is why time-restricted feeding or fasting can be a game changer when aligned with these rhythms. You're not just creating a calorie deficit, you're leveraging your biological architecture to optimize fat oxidation. In practice, this means confining your eating window to roughly 8-10 hours, ideally starting a few hours after waking and ending several hours before bed. A common protocol might involve having your first meal around 10 a.m. and finishing your last meal by 6 or 7 p.m. Why wait a few hours after waking to eat? In the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking, cortisol levels are naturally elevated. This is part of your body's natural circadian cortisol pulse. Cortisol is not the villain it's often made out to be. In the right context, it's incredibly useful. This early morning cortisol surge helps mobilize fat stores, increases alertness, and prepares your body for action. Eating too early in this cortisol-rich window can blunt that fat-mobilizing effect, particularly if the meal is carbohydrate-heavy. By delaying your first meal slightly, you give your body time to operate in a fasted, fat-oxidizing state, and you ride the wave of natural catecholamines like norepinephrine and epinephrine, which further support fat breakdown. This isn't just theoretical. Studies show that morning fasted states combined with light exposure and movement significantly enhance fat metabolism and even improve mental clarity and focus. Now let's move to the end of the day. Eating late, especially close to bedtime, not only misaligns your feeding with your circadian rhythm, but also disrupts the release of melatonin, a hormone essential for quality sleep. And here's where it gets even more interconnected. Poor sleep directly impairs your glucose regulation the next day and increases cravings for high-calorie, high-fat foods. So late-night eating initiates a vicious cycle. It disrupts sleep, which in turn impairs metabolic function and increases hunger the next day, making fat loss increasingly difficult. Another key point: the body's ability to enter autophagy, a cellular cleanup process linked to both longevity and fat metabolism, is enhanced during extended fasts, especially overnight. When you stop eating 3 or more hours before bed, you increase the duration and quality of this fasted repair window. Autophagy is like your body's internal recycling plant. It gets rid of damaged cells and signals your system to run more efficiently. From a fat loss perspective, this helps recalibrate your metabolic machinery. Some people worry that skipping breakfast or fasting leads to muscle loss or slows metabolism. However, the data, particularly from studies using intermittent fasting models, shows that when protein intake and exercise are sufficient, Muscle preservation is not only possible, but often improved, especially due to elevated growth hormone during fasting periods. Finally, we need to remember that fasting is a form of hormetic stress, a mild, manageable stressor that teaches the body to become more resilient. It sharpens your insulin sensitivity, reduces inflammation, and enhances mitochondrial function, all of which contribute to faster, more efficient fat burning. But the key is alignment. Fasting at random times, or binge eating late at night after skipping meals all day, completely undermines the benefits. To unlock fat loss, you must fast in accordance with how your body was designed to function across the light-dark cycle. So the real secret isn't starvation, it's structure. By syncing your eating patterns with your circadian biology, delaying food in the morning, ending meals well before bedtime, and consolidating your intake into a consistent daily window, you create a physiological environment where fat loss is not only possible, but natural. This isn't about extremes, it's about rhythm. Biology loves rhythm, and when you feed your body in harmony with its natural timing, fat loss becomes far less of a struggle and much more of a side effect of doing things right. When we talk about accelerating fat loss through exercise, the timing of that exercise matters more than most people realize. While many focus solely on how long or how intensely they work out, they often overlook one of the most potent tools for amplifying fat oxidation: fasted morning training, aligned with your body's natural hormonal and neurological rhythms. Each morning, as you emerge from sleep, your physiology is primed for action. Cortisol levels rise in what's called the cortisol awakening response, peaking roughly 30 to 45 minutes after waking. While cortisol is often viewed negatively due to its association with stress, in the right context and timing, it's incredibly beneficial. In the morning, elevated cortisol increases alertness, mobilizes energy reserves, and enhances the breakdown of stored fats. This is precisely when the body is most prepared for physical movement, not just psychologically, but hormonally and metabolically. Training in this fasted state, particularly within the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking, takes advantage of this natural hormonal environment. Without a recent influx of food, your body relies on internal energy stores, namely glycogen and fat, to fuel movement. When glycogen levels are modest due to the overnight fast, the body becomes more efficient at tapping into fat stores, especially visceral fat, which is metabolically active and more strongly linked to health risks. What's happening here isn't magic, it's biochemistry. In a fasted state, the levels of insulin are low, which removes the hormonal brake on fat oxidation. Simultaneously, epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline, are naturally elevated due to both waking and movement. These catecholamines signal the breakdown of fat tissue into free fatty acids, which can then be used as fuel during exercise. This creates a metabolic cascade where fat becomes the dominant energy source, particularly during lower to moderate intensity activity such as brisk walking, zone 2 cardio, or circuit-style resistance training. But what if your goal includes not only fat loss, but also performance or preserving lean muscle? Research has shown that fasted training does not necessarily compromise muscle retention, especially when daily protein intake is adequate and resistance training is part of the routine. In fact, certain adaptations, such as improved mitochondrial efficiency and insulin sensitivity, may be enhanced when training is done in a glycogen-depleted, fasted state. These adaptations not only improve long-term metabolic health, but also make your body more efficient at utilizing both carbohydrates and fats, a hallmark of metabolic flexibility. Let's consider the type of training best suited for this fasted state. Short bouts of high-intensity interval training HIIT, consisting of 30 to 90 seconds of all-out effort followed by 2 to 3 minutes of recovery, are highly effective. Just 4 to 6 rounds can significantly boost post-exercise oxygen consumption epoch, meaning your body continues to burn fat for hours after the session has ended. This is due to the metabolic demands of restoring homeostasis, repairing muscle tissue, replenishing ATP, and clearing lactate processes that all require energy and draw upon stored fat. Resistance training also works well in the fasted state, particularly for those aiming to maintain or build lean mass while reducing body fat. Compound movements such as squats, deadlifts, push-ups, and rows not only stimulate large muscle groups, but also elevate growth hormone, which is naturally higher in the morning and further amplified by fasted movement. Growth hormone supports both fat mobilization and muscle preservation, making it a critical player in body composition management. It's important to address a common concern: energy and performance during fasted training. Some people fear they won't have enough strength or endurance without a pre-workout meal. While this can be true for certain high-volume or long-duration sessions, most people adapt well over time to moderate fasted sessions. Hydration, however, is essential, especially since cortisol and adrenaline can increase fluid excretion. Consuming water with a pinch of salt or using electrolytes supports hydration and helps avoid fatigue or lightheadedness. There's also the neurological component. Morning exercise, especially when paired with exposure to natural sunlight, sets the tone for increased alertness, mood regulation, and better sleep later in the evening. This happens because early physical movement anchors your circadian clock, increasing dopamine and serotonin, both of which enhance focus and well-being. Moreover, regular morning movement improves dopaminergic tone, meaning that your baseline motivation and drive stay elevated throughout the day, which can further support adherence to healthy eating and lifestyle choices. It's not just that fasted training burns fat in the moment, it's that it creates a biochemical environment that favors fat metabolism throughout the day. You start the day metabolically aligned, mentally alert, and hormonally balanced. This makes it easier to resist high sugar cravings, easier to make rational food choices, and easier to wind down in the evening for high-quality sleep, which in itself is critical for fat loss. All of this creates a virtuous cycle. You train in the morning, which improves metabolism and focus. You eat in a restricted window aligned with your circadian rhythm. You sleep better at night, which resets hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin, making fat loss easier to sustain over time. Ultimately, fasted morning training isn't just about burning more fat during your workout. It's about training your metabolism, priming your brain, and harnessing the natural hormonal architecture that evolution designed for peak function. It's a biologically strategic decision, not just a fitness trend, and when applied consistently, it becomes a powerful cornerstone of any science-based fat loss plan. When it comes to fat loss, people often focus on what to eat, how to train, or when to sleep, and those are crucial factors. But there's an invisible layer that drives all of it: motivation, craving, and consistency. And at the center of that layer is dopamine, a molecule often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, but more accurately described as the driver of pursuit. Dopamine doesn't reward you for achieving something, it propels you toward the thing in the first place. If you've ever found yourself highly motivated for a few days only to crash into apathy and cravings by the weekend, what you experienced wasn't just bad willpower. It was a mismanagement of dopamine. Fat loss isn't just a physical battle, it's a neurochemical one. And once you understand how dopamine circuits work, you begin to see that the key to long-term success isn't just discipline, it's dopamine control. To start, dopamine is produced in a few key areas of the brain: most notably the ventral tegmental area VTA and the substantia nigra. These areas project to regions like the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex, which influence motivation, decision making, and reward anticipation. Every time you do something, your brain interprets as beneficial, whether it's eating, exercising, scrolling social media, or receiving praise. Your dopamine system responds. It gives you a hit of motivation, a sense of wanting. And then, if the reward is realized, a brief sense of satisfaction. Here's where it gets interesting. The anticipation of reward actually releases more dopamine than the reward itself. This means your brain is more chemically invested in seeking the cookie than in actually eating it. And modern life hijacks this system. Highly processed foods, endless scrolling, and binge-worthy content deliver quick, artificial dopamine spikes that lead to dysregulation, the equivalent of riding a roller coaster of highs and crashes, leaving you less motivated over time and more vulnerable to impulsive decisions. So how do you apply this to fat loss? The first principle is this: learn to protect your dopamine baseline. Every time you indulge in a hyper-rewarding stimulus such as sugary snacks, frequent dopamine hits from phone notifications, or energy drinks, your brain recalibrates by slightly lowering its dopamine baseline. This means that the next time you try to do something healthy like going for a walk or prepping a simple meal, it feels dull, unrewarding, and effortful. You're not broken, your brain has just adapted. This is why managing cravings starts with managing your inputs. One powerful strategy is called dopamine detoxing, or more technically, dopamine scheduling. The goal is not to eliminate dopamine, but to become deliberate with how and when it spikes. For example, delay your first digital interaction of the day, avoid scrolling your phone first thing. Instead, stack positive habits with natural dopamine boosters like sunlight exposure, hydration, and physical movement. These reinforce your dopamine circuits through effort-based rewards, which have been shown to create longer, lasting motivation compared to passive or easy hits. Another key strategy is to move your source of pleasure to the process rather than the outcome. If your only dopamine reward comes from the scale dropping or your body looking a certain way, you've created a fragile system. But if you train your brain to feel satisfied from simply completing the workout, following through on your meal prep, or even resisting a craving, you build a self-free, enforcing dopamine loop one that fuels consistency. This can be done with simple practices. One of the most powerful is deliberate reflection after task completion. After a workout, take 15 seconds to mentally tell yourself that was a win. This small act increases the association between effort and reward, helping your brain begin to crave the action itself, not just the result. This is called dopamine anchoring, and over time, it rewires your motivational circuitry toward long-term behaviors. Sleep also plays a critical role in dopamine regulation. When you're sleep deprived, your brain's dopamine receptors become less sensitive. This makes you chase higher levels of stimulation just to feel normal. That's why poor sleep is so tightly linked with increased cravings, especially for high-carb, high-fat foods. Your brain is trying to self-medicate the dopamine deficit. So if you want to stay consistent with fat loss, protect your sleep as if it were part of your workout routine, because it is, neurologically speaking. Finally, we need to address social media and digital overload, because this is the silent destroyer of motivation. Every swipe, like, or notification gives your brain a mini dopamine spike. The more often this happens, the more your brain becomes conditioned to expect rewards with no effort. This makes going to the gym or cooking your meals feel disproportionately hard. To offset this, implement boundaries, keep your phone out of reach during your most productive hours, and take tech-free walks or workouts to reconnect with effort-driven dopamine, the kind that builds mental resilience. Fat loss is not just about eating less and moving more. It's about managing the internal chemistry that governs your decisions, your cravings, and your ability to stay the course. Dopamine is not your enemy, but it must be directed. By delaying gratification, embracing effort, protecting sleep, and minimizing overstimulation, you condition your brain to crave the process, not just the payoff. In this way, fat loss becomes more than a physical transformation. It becomes a neurological upgrade, one where you're not just changing your body, but rewiring your brain to pursue difficult things willingly and consistently, and that, ultimately, is the path to lasting change.